Alright, welcome back. In this next video of the series, we're going to work on the armor and all the extra pieces and extra geometry that go over the Sci-Fi suit. So let's jump back into the ZBrush file and start with the main chest plate. I'm going to show you the technique first, and then I'm going to move a little bit faster since the rest is, it's just rinse and repeat. It's the same thing over and over. I'm going to use the same technique, but, into a bunch of other pieces. So with the base mesh at its highest subdivision level, I'm going to use the mask lasso with the symmetry enabled to define the general shape of that chest plate. Then I'm going to refine the mask using the mask sharp tool. This is a custom masking brush, basically a sharper version of the default mask pen. So you can totally use the mask pen. Once I'm happy with the shape, the next step is to extract that mask area into a new subtool. This is by far one of my favorite techniques in ZBrush. I'll use it all the time, and that is the reason why I've added it to my custom palette, so I have it here. I'll set the thickness to 0 and then click on Extract. This gives you a preview, so to actually create the mesh, you need to click on Accept. And by the way, all of these controls that I just showed you are located in the Extract section at the bottom of the subtool subpalette. So what you end up with is a single-sided mesh based on your mask. For the third step of this process, I'm going to run a ZRemesher just to quickly generate a cleaner topology of this piece. You might have to click the ZRemesher button a couple of times or, maybe adjust the target polygon count, but the results are solid. Of course, this piece is still a flat piece of geometry, or like single-sided, and is very close to the body, but we're going to add thickness later on. Now, before we move into that part, I just want to show you another very quick and an easy way to create additional panels or sections. So I'm going to duplicate this chest piece, subdivide it, and delete the lower subdivision levels. Then with the slice curve, I'm going to cut a few lines to define a new panel. It looks a little bit random because it's just a bunch of colors and cuts that feel, again, a bit random, but I'm focusing on a specific section. So once I have that section in mind, with the select rectangular brush, which is one of the selecting brushes, I'm going to isolate that piece or the section or let's say the colors or polygroups that I want to keep, and then I'm going to delete the rest. That's it. We now have pretty much the same thing that we had with the extraction, but just using a different technique. And the process that follows is the same. ZRemesher again with a new section, just tidying things up, and now we have a brand new piece of geometry. Now I'm going to assign the main chest plate a darker color just so that it makes it easier to see it. And then I'm going to enable Dynamic Subdivision to add smoothness and thickness. All of these settings live in the Dynamic Subdivision under the Geometry subpalette. And I'm going to repeat the same process for the new piece that we just created that sits on top of the chest plate. Give it thickness and then mirror and weld it so that we can have it in both sides. And that's basically it. Those are the two core techniques that I use for this kind of modeling. From here on, I'm going to keep things very simple and mainly using the masking and the extraction technique. The nice thing is that you can now mask and extract from the new pieces themselves. So any new geometry that you create conforms perfectly to the clean shapes that you already have rather than the base body, let's say. Now, throughout this process, there are two main principles that I always keep in mind. And not just for this type of project or the genre, but it's more like a design work in general. First, I like to keep things simple and separate. So when you look at a reference or a complex design that you're trying to recreate, it might feel overwhelming or it might feel like, oh, this is a little bit too much. I don't know how to tackle it. But if you break it down or you break down the complexity down into smaller pieces, you'll realize that each part is actually rather simple. It's just that the sum of all of those small shapes and all of those parts make it look really intricate. So build the complexity out of simple forms. And since ZBrush lets you keep things separate in subtools or multiple objects or even multiple tools, take advantage of that. The second principle is more about thinking about the functionality of the design. Even when I exaggerate things or stylize design, I like to keep things grounded in reality so that, they feel a bit more believable. That means that the design should feel like it actually works in reality, or at least enough for the viewer to buy into it. So for instance, the chest plate that I created should protect the torso, right? That's the functionality of it, but it still allows the flexibility below the rib cage and the full arm movement and that sort of thing. So keeping these ideas, simplicity and functionality in mind helps a lot when you're designing an armor, in this case, that feels more real or that you can believe that it could exist. Now let's go back into the practical bits and we're going to continue with the boots. And since I made this using a slightly different approach, I want to cover that technique too. So for this type of assets, I like to clone my main tool, and in this case, the base mesh, and it creates a completely separate tool in ZBrush so I can experiment with it, cut it up, with everything that I want without affecting the original. So I remove everything that I don't need, just leaving the foot or like the lower portion of the leg on one side. And then I Dynamesh the whole thing just to create a rough blob of geometry that sort of covers the boot area. After that, I bring the piece back into the main tool and adjust it just to make sure that it covers the foot area. Now, the great thing about Dynamesh is that it lets you explore shapes freely before committing to anything. That's the big difference between this technique and the previous method. Even for the sole area, I split the section out as a separate Dynamesh object so that I can refine it on its own. And then using my custom HR Geiger cutter brush, I marked out some panels or in general kind of like designs of the boot, basically sketching in 3D instead of 2D. And once I'm happy with the overall form, again, very sketchy, I merge the boot with the sole pieces, clone that tool, and move it into a clean workspace. So that's basically creating a new tool, really. And here's where another powerful ZBrush workflow comes in. I append a Z-sphere. That's a very unique sort of feature or tool in ZBrush. But it does have a topology subpalette. So you can go there and you can enable the edit topology. So this tool takes a little bit of practice to get used to, but once you get the hang of it, this manual retopology process can be incredibly fast. And this is one of the reasons I like it. So all I'm doing here is placing points based on that volume that I have, and I'm connecting them to create quads. So I am literally using the Dynamesh object or that sketch that I had as a visual reference to maintain the flow or like the loops and also the volume. Keep in mind that the topology flow that I'm creating here is purely for the concept purpose. You can totally optimize this even better or simplify it so that if you're planning to do this or creating this for an animation, then you can account for more deformation. But this works totally fine and it will do the trick just fine. Once the topology was ready, I created an adaptive skin with Dynamesh set to 0 and used the topology layout to define polygroups. These polygroups are really handy, so if you spend time setting them up, it will help you during the next stage, which comes down to refinement and adjustment and adding details. And these polygroup IDs will also help me to create additional panels and divisions in the boot itself later on. So for instance, with the ZModeler brush, I can use the extrude or the Q mesh, which is the action of the ZModeler, and use a single polygroup as my target to pull out new panels and just extrude that geometry based on those colors or those polygons ID, just like I did with the tip of this boot. So I will repeat this process all of the boot, just varying the thickness or the paneling thickness a little bit, just to, again, create more interesting variation. I will also add some extra edge loops where I needed a sharper corners. And you can also use the creasing tool if you prefer to have more of a mechanical edge or something that is very, very sharp. But once the boot base mesh is ready, I can copy it back to my working tool, add a few straps, and then mirror it and weld it so that I can have it in both legs. Done. That's it for this stage. In the next video, we're going to take all the pieces that we created back into Character Creator 5. We're going to set them up properly, and we're going to prepare everything for texturing in Substance 3D Painter. I'll see you there.